This episode is brought to you by Struzy Golf. Hey coaches out there, what I'm about to share with you is for the 1% who are ready to finally take their business to the next level. If you're ready to grow and evolve as a business owner, keep listening. I'm a coach just like you. I want more time to invest in my players, build my skills, and spend it with my family. We also both struggle with the idea of taking time off and sacrificing revenue. Coaches like us need tools to save time, automate admin tasks, and deliver excellent player experiences every single time. What if I told you there is a platform that captures 37% net new revenue in the first 60 days? It only takes 5 minutes to set up, and a simple copy-paste puts the rest on autopilot. As a founder and CEO of your business, you would fire yourself for not taking advantage of this value. Download a Struzy right now and start the journey to modernizing your business. Oh, and when you create your account, don't forget to add an asterisk, that little star thing on your keyboard, to your last name so they know the guru sent you. If you aren't convinced just yet, keep listening to learn more. Now let's get back to the show.
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
You know how to cut to the core of me, Baxter. You're so wise. You're like a miniature Buddha covered in hair.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1, no touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Golf Guru Show. I'm your host, Jason Sutton. I'm the Director of Instruction at the beautiful Colleton River Club in Bluffton, South Carolina. And it's my mission to break down high performers in the teaching and coaching business and all fields of study. And today I've got a very special guest that's a little out of the golf space, but getting into the golf space. So I'm excited to unpack and tease out what makes her great and successful, from daily habits to how she operates with her clients. All I ask is that you download this episode and early episodes of the Golf Guru Show. Hit that purple subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes that will be coming your way. Share this podcast on social or with your friends and with other coaches and players that might benefit from this information. Also, if you don't mind, go visit my website at golfgurushow.com. And please subscribe to it, leave your email, and then you will be on the list as future shows come out. And also I'll be posting some stuff, some content, and some other things which you don't want to miss. And if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that would be super helpful as well. I am very excited about this one, as my guest this week is Dr. Savannah Gardner. Who is Dr. Savannah Gardner? I want to read her bio because I think it's just so well written that I couldn't do it justice. So I'm going to read from part of it because I think it's so well written. Dr. Gardner is a chiropractic physician from South Florida whose mission is to redefine chiropractic experience, the chiropractic experience for athletes and their families. She is a certified pediatric chiropractor with a passion for treating families no matter the age. As she says, from the womb to the tomb, she treats, which is super cool. She also provides specialized prenatal care as one of the only Webster certified providers in the area. She grew up in Jupiter, Florida, where golf became a huge part of her life, and she is excited to provide specialized care in the Pinehurst area now as a Titleist Performance TPI medical level 3 expert. Dr. Savannah, as a young child, she dreamed of following in her mother's footsteps and becoming a majorette at the collegiate level. At age 17, she suffered a tumbling injury resulting in a spinal fusion surgery, it's like what Tiger had basically, at the L5, S1 level. She returned to sport and was selected as a Crimsonite at the University of Alabama, which is what she was looking to do. With residual pain and a rigorous performance schedule, she was in agony, and over-the-counter medications weren't helping anymore. Her athletic trainer recommended a local chiropractor, and she immediately saw a significant change in her pain and athletic abilities. She went on to perform in 2 SEC championships and 3 national championship games, living out her dream pain-free. She graduated a year early, earning her BS degree in Human Performance and Exercise Science. She then moved back to Florida to attend Palmer College, where she was awarded the Doctor of Chiropractic degree and college's most prestigious accolade, which is the Clinical Excellence Award, which is pretty awesome. During her tenure at Palmer, she quickly found a passion for family care and women's health, leading her to become Webster certified. She also completed over 200 plus hours of postgraduate education through an ICPA pertaining to the care of children and pregnant women. Now she's getting into the performance movement specialist space, especially with athletes and specifically golf. So I first met Savannah at our Carolinas Teaching Summit last fall and was so impressed with her passion and curiosity for learning. And she just asked great questions during our presentation, so I knew that I had to get her on the show. We had such a great conversation tonight where she shares her story and the reason why she got into the wellness and human movement and performance business, to some interesting observations and wisdom that she has gathered from her time spent at TPI. She's been to TPI twice, so she's getting after it. To some of her experiences with so many of her athletes now and how she has supported them in their journey to high performance. I enjoyed this conversation so much, as there's so much to unpack that we will probably need to do a round 2 at some point. I have to say that I apologize for not getting to our listener questions, as we kind of got deep into the weeds and we just totally forgot. So Dr. Savannah and I will figure out how to get those questions answered in one shape or form, maybe an IG Live or shooting some content for Instagram or something, but we'll figure that out. So without further delay, I bring you the brilliant and talented Dr. Savannah Gardner. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gardner. Like, do you get tired of hearing that? Yeah, it's like it's so cool.
Well, what's funny is my patients call me Dr. Savannah because I see a wider range of patients. You know, some of them being as old as 3 days old, and some of them being in their later parts of their life. But my students, when I taught anatomy at a local college, used to call me Dr. Gardner. So I'd be out in public and I'd hear Dr. Savannah and I'd put on that hat, and then I'd hear Dr. Gardner and just kind of sit there and I'd be like, oh, that's me.
What do you prefer?
You know, I personally am a little bit more casual. If you call me Savannah, it won't hurt my feelings. But I think Dr. Savannah is just a little bit easier. It's a little less aggressive sometimes. So I don't really care. It's not something that I hold too near and dear.
Yeah, the doctor part's the important part. I think that's.
I guess so.
Yeah, to be recognized, like the work that you put in, and it's not easy. And the journey that you've been through is pretty fascinating. So I definitely want to kind of dive into that. So
sounds good.
Let's start with your backstory, because I think it is interesting, and how it sort of led you to where you are now is very, very prevalent. Talk about your early childhood. I'm kind of teeing you up because I know a lot about you, but I want you to tell your story of like how that led to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I grew up in Jupiter, Florida, and I think that's kind of where a little bit of my golf history starts from. But as far as my childhood goes and my sports goes, I was a baton twirler, which a lot of people are probably not familiar with that. You being in the Carolinas, you're probably familiar. You've seen it probably at college football games, but it's kind of a different sport. But there's a lot of similarities. It's a very skill-based sport. It's very individual, but also there's team parts to it. But that was really my focus as a child. And my sister growing up was severely disabled. She had a rare seizure disorder called Aicardi syndrome, which affects the eyesight. It affects the part of the brain that connects the two sides together. So it's that corpus callosum in the middle of the brain that helps the right side communicate with the left side, which is really important. You know, the right side of your brain connects to the left side of your body and vice versa. So any stimulus, like a loud noise, like someone slamming a door or dropping a fork on a plate, unfortunately, it would send her into a seizure. So we grew up in a very safe household, but my parents did a great job of giving me the ability to be independent and supporting my development academically, sports. And although we had to make some changes that I didn't really recognize as differences in my friends at the time, I still had a really, really unique childhood. But I think that led me also into healthcare. I grew up going in and out of the hospitals with her, and I always just knew that I wanted to give back to the field that gave my family so much hope. The way that I practice is very collaborative, and I know that you're a very big fan of collaborative care too, or yes, collaborative work within your field. But that, you know, seeing the doctors actually work together, she had an OT and a PT, and neurologist and all these different doctors that would roundtable and work together to help her. Women with her condition are only supposed to live a couple years, and because of that collaborative care and to attribute to my parents' care of her, she was able to live till she was 16. So
oh, wow.
I just saw so many confounding factors come together that just really influenced the way that I wanted to go forward and help people with my story and then go on to add knowledge to it. So that was a little bit of my childhood. She passed away when I was 14. That was the year that I was really taking off in my sport. And I was competing at the national level. I had just won my state title. And because of that, I was practicing pretty heavily, overdoing it a little bit, as often our youth athletes do. And I suffered a back injury. So that led to bilateral fracture, which causes instability in my lumbar spine. The doctors at my age didn't really know what to do with me. So their advice was just to kind of deal with it, figure it out. And unfortunately, 3 years later, I had surgery. So that was kind of my start and end of what I thought was going to be my athletic career.
So let me stop you there just for a second. So looking back now on the diagnosis that you got, do you think it was correct? Do you think surgery was the right way? Or could you have done something now with your information and schooling that would have saved you from that?
My answer is yes, because there's a lot of confounding factors there. Knowing what I know now, I think the advice that I should have been given was to see a physical therapist or a chiropractor to look out into conservative options. My parents did the best they could with the knowledge that they were given, and they were always very good about getting second opinions, and they did that. And they listened to their doctors, though. And at the time, that was what we knew. I mean, there wasn't a lot of research on pediatric fractures of the spine and instability, unless it was like scoliosis related. So, now knowing what I know, I often treat a lot of athletes with my injury. And in fact, like 10% of the population suffers from it and they don't even know it. It's a very common injury with like football players and volleyball players. So now knowing what I know, yeah, I probably wouldn't have done the surgery. But at the same time, with how bad it got at one point, I'm glad we did it. So it's part of my story. And I think my patients that don't know my story and they come in with post-surgical pain and there's some emotional sides of it, I kind of get to call them out a little bit and be like, hey, I've been there right there with you. And this is proof that if you take care of yourself and you care to do so, you can get better and you can live a happy and healthy life and a pain-free life. So I think it gives me a little bit of respect amongst my patients sometimes, but also gives me a little leg up on them too.
Yeah, I was hoping you would say that because it's. I mean, it's always hindsight's 20/20, right? I mean, we only know what we know at that time. Who knows? The technology probably wasn't as advanced as it is now. Like there's a lot of things that have changed in both of our worlds.
Oh my gosh, yes, even in the past few years.
Oh, incredible. So continue. You're in college. How do you like?
Oh, yeah.
Let me back up because this is one of the questions that when you were doing you got surgery, like you probably felt like my dreams crushed, right? I mean, I know you were kind of following in your mom's footsteps. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah.
She was doing the same thing. So how did you deal with that? And then how did you get through that and actually achieve your dream of playing in college?
Yeah. So when I had the surgery, the information we were given was like, I think they did it pro bono because they didn't really know what was going to happen. And I remember coming out of the surgery and the surgeon saying, I did my best work and I hope it works out. But unfortunately, I don't recommend you doing any manual labor for work. And at the time, I wanted to be an athletic trainer. He talked about never lifting heavy. My tumbling days were definitely over. I probably shouldn't return to sport to find other ways to love it, which at least he said something nice. But I was crushed. And I remember laying in bed like, it's over. I had all these big dreams. My mom was a major at Alabama and back when Bear Bryant was coach. So she had those glory days. And I knew that I had wanted to follow in her footsteps, but I just didn't know it would happen. But, I persisted. I did listen to their directions, but I also pushed myself a little bit more and ended up being able to audition and return to sport within a year and auditioned at Alabama, made the team. Yeah. And I relied on what I could do. And that's really how I look at my patients now is like, okay, what can you do? And let's work there. So it made me a little creative, but I was able to create a routine and provide the skills that I knew I could offer to make me a great candidate. And I was selected. And it was the coolest experience.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, you were there it's been a pretty good run for the football team. And you were there for a few national championships. And
It's been a rough start to 2024 for us, except for Nick Dunlap. We'll thank him for that. Roll Tide.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
But yeah, I was lucky. I never didn't. We went to a national championship every year I was there. So I recognize my privilege.
Oh my gosh. So you're in college, tell everybody kind of what you studied and like how that led you. I think that was interesting as well to getting your degree and what you're doing now.
Well, I had different options at that point. I was kind of listening to the whole be careful with manual labor. And don't get me wrong, I had a lot of pain being a college athlete, but we worked through it. But, I was looking at sports psychology. I was looking at dietetics because my sister's condition, they actually took her off of all seizure medication and strictly treated her with nutrition, which was like dumbfounding back in the 90s and early 2000s, but it saved her life, really. So I knew that I was just kind of into holistic care, wanted that more conservative option. That's one reason I love Dr. McCabe. He's a huge sports psychologist, but I knew I just wanted I wanted hands-on care. I always knew that I learned from a hands-on perspective. I'm useless sitting in a lecture. I have to ask questions and take notes or I just don't know what's happening. So I knew that if I was going to provide care, it needed to be something that I could apply manually. So, I was looking at different options. I actually randomly applied for a chiropractic internship. And at the time, I was terrified. I tell all my new patients when they come in scared. I went to my chiropractor the first time and I was in tears, but I survived and ended up one. So we're good. But I interned under them and very quickly fell in love with it. I was amazed at the amount of people that were touched by the care. And I kind of just put my trust in them and my faith in them and realized they had a lot of knowledge and I applied to where they went to school and the rest is history.
So it was Palmer College? Is that the name of the college?
Yeah. Palmer, Florida. It's in Daytona Beach area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You tell me I'm going to Florida again and I was like, done.
Yeah, because you grew up in Jupiter, right? So you're in the hotbed of golf.
Oh, yeah.
and everything down there. So very, very cool. So talk a little bit about you're an owner. You're skipping a lot of steps here, right? So give us some details. I think it's got to be so satisfying to be where you're at now of being able to run your own business. And you do such a great job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
If I'm being completely honest, I don't know how I got here, but I'm here.
Oh, come on. It's too modest.
Well, I worked coming right out of school. Well, during school, I found a love for pediatric care very quickly, mostly because there was a big gap. I found that a lot of my professors, when I'd raise my hand and say, how does this apply to an infant? Or how does this apply to a teenager? They kind of just stared at me with blank stares. And so that really keyed my interest. And I decided to go specialize more into pediatric care. Not that that's all that I treat, but I wanted to know as much as I could to help support that population, especially because when I was an athlete and when most people are athletes, they're kids, and I once had a chiropractor business person tell me, you can't be a sports chiropractor and a pediatric chiropractor. And I was like, I beg to differ because that's the best time to develop an athlete. So I focused there. And then coming out of school, I moved to Columbus, Georgia. My husband's in the military. So they brought us to Fort Benning and I worked in a traditional chiropractic office there. And it was a great job. I loved my boss. It was a great facility and I had wonderful patients and my patients did get better, but I just started to question some things. I was reading research and was wondering where we were missing the mark because at that time we were essentially just providing adjustments and we would use some soft tissue therapy, but I just wasn't seeing the results that I wanted to as quickly as I was, especially with pediatric care because they get better very quickly if they're given the tools that they need. So that led me to dive down a deeper path and I knew that I wanted to get a really good diagnostic process, which led me to what we use is SFMA. And so I knew I wanted to do that. I saw that TPI offered it. And then my husband being a really good scratch golfer, he was pushing me to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, he's pretty good.
Okay,
he played on the PGA Junior Tour when we were kiddos. So he won't admit it, but he's pretty good.
Nice.
But I think he, brought light to TPI as well. And at that point we knew we were going to Pinehurst. So I've always loved golf. I've always wanted to play. I just was scared because of my own back injury. That was another thing I was told not to do. So again, intrigued my interest. There's a pattern. If I don't understand something, I learn more about it. But if I can't learn it all, I don't want to do it. So I just did the full track. So went out to do their medical level 3 and enjoyed it so much. It piqued my interest and it's really changed the way that I practice. And, we kind of alluded to that earlier with technology changing the way that you guys coach as well. It's just such an evolving field and objective findings, and data is so addicting. And it's just fun to support players and athletes. And I'm in that stage of my life right now where I've left my sport. And in a lot of ways, I struggle with that as a former athlete, but I get to give back in that way and still support my players from the sidelines. So it's been really fun. And now I've got my little practice, which is growing, and I just love it. I'm very grateful. I go to work every day and it doesn't feel like work. And that sounds like success to me.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. I mean, I was shocked when digging into, I was stalking all of your former podcasts and information that I could find about you, and, adjusting like newborn babies and the stuff you guys do with pregnant women is incredible.
Yeah.
I really had no idea that was even out there. I'm sure, that's helped so many people.
That's really rewarding, because just kind of like I was told as a patient, like, good luck. They are too. Women are in their pregnancies, and they're said, "Oh, you're in pain." Do
anything to them, right? I mean, it's like it would be, but you having the knowledge and the adjustments, and you can. I mean, I just can't even imagine. Like, I would love to like shadow you for a day and just like, oh my god, I can't believe you just.
It was funny reaching out in Georgia, making connections with local physicians. One of the OBs there, they had. They were busy. I met them during lunch, and the only question he asked me was, "Are you scared to touch pregnant women?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Awesome. I'll send people your way."
There you go. Yeah.
Because there's such a need, and there's, again, a huge gap that needs to be filled. So yeah, I love it. It's this morning even, I had 3 pregnant women, a golfer. I had a special forces guy that we were working on. I mean, my schedule is just so cool. I had a 9-week-old baby. It's just ever changing.
That is crazy. Yeah. So obviously we're going to focus more on golfers, or just athletes, I think, right? I mean, we want to spend time talking about, human movement and everything that we're trying to do, like supporting what we do. And then obviously learning from what you do on your side. Go a little deeper into what you learned at TPI, because it's always interesting for somebody on the outside kind of looking in, and don't be afraid to like criticize like what we're doing as far as teachers go, because we can always use the help. But like, give me like your bullet points of like what you really learned, what surprised you, and what that entails as far as like the medical certification.
I think the biggest thing is, what didn't I learn? I actually just went out and audited it again, because the first year I went out, my mind was just completely blown. And then the second year, I felt like I was able to really master a lot of the things that they talk about. But it's really cool when you look at an athlete and as a patient from a holistic perspective, as a person, and not just what they're presenting with. And that's really how their model works. And I know that there's like different opinions out there. But from a medical perspective, I like processes, I like diagnostic tools, and I want to see us go through certain steps. And I know that your players want to too. They want to see progress. And that's something that TPI with all their data has. And from a medical perspective, that's the best of the best. So that's where I wanted to get my training. So we started looking at the diagnostic processes, having those things that they want to see. And what I love is that they're very aggressive about, if they send you a player, this is what we expect you to do. And that creates consistency. And so I really liked that. We spent a lot of time on the diagnostic side and making sure you're getting things right. And then from there, we had fun. So we looked at like the visual system. We looked at balance. We looked at golf specific movement, the swing characteristics, injury inducing mechanics, really anything that they had time to throw at you. But it's so funny is they start the seminar out and they say, okay, we're going to talk about all this in some capacity, but we need to know what you really want to learn while you're here. And it's going to change every time, because there's just so much information. And unfortunately, 3 full days just isn't enough. That's why I went back. I'll probably go back again.
That's great. Yeah.
So it's just a lot of info.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, those are all the bullet points that we want to kind of dig into. It's like diagnostics. Like, I mean, one of the questions we always ask instructors, because we want to know their process, right? And it sounds like that's sort of what you're talking about. So to kind of get the conversation going, I guess, is like, if an athlete comes to you, can you describe sort of how you take them through that first session? And I'm sure that's a lot of what you learn at TPI, right? It's like, do the screens change? I mean, I know the general screens that we take our golfers through, and I know my favorite ones that sort of illuminate some of the swing faults or just swing characteristics that we see players make. Like, take me through that process.
Yeah. So It depends if it's like an actual player or a patient, but either way, I'm incredibly thorough. My consultation alone is usually 15 to 20 minutes, and that's just getting to know you. I want to know your health history, your injuries, your previous sports, what previous doctors you've seen, what advice you were given, what your coaches are saying. I want to know your stats. I want to know everything, because I don't want to leave any detail left unmarked. And it's funny because those are things that I'll bring up later on as we're getting somewhere. I'm like, okay, we're getting held up here. Let me go back to my notes and see why. But I really want to understand why an athlete moves the way that they do, why they might not. I have athletes that switch sports, and I had one athlete who was a former hockey player, and I know he had a ton of injuries coming in, but I wanted to know all about him. So one of my favorite questions that I ask all my patients is to go through each joint of the body and tell me a health history, which is hilarious because they think they've told me everything, and then all of a sudden they haven't.
Sure. Yeah.
And I get a full life story. So that's one thing that I do. And then from there, we do like a TPI level 1 screen. We do the basic things that are across the board always the same. And where I get to be creative is in my treatment. So that's really what happens my first visit. We do all of our screenings. I do my orthopedic testing. I make sure there's no need for imaging or any diagnostic testings. We got to rule out the scary stuff, of course, and then go from there. And then part of my favorite is when they come back in and we look at all the information and we come up with the plan. I love programming, and that's where I like to talk with the coaches and talk with their strength training coaches and see what's needed and support the athlete from where they're at, where they want to go, and then what's also best for them and their body and what they're capable of. So it's a process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, right? I mean, I didn't know how much. I know you're not, I guess, a trainer, but I'm the same way. I'm like, people are like, well, what exercise should I do? I'm like, well, I always say I'm not a trainer, but this is, I've spent enough time with people.
Yes, you have the knowledge.
Right. General knowledge, right? I mean, we don't try to take their jobs, but I didn't know how much, because I've seen pictures of you like in the gym, like working with some people, right? It's like, I kind of look at you almost, don't take offense, like, female Dr. K.
It's hard to offend me.
No, but I mean, this is a compliment, but you've heard, I've pointed you toward Dr. Mike K, which is one of the best that I've ever been around.
Huge honor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and I kind of look at you the same way as, with all this knowledge, but you have to kind of dig in, especially when you're dealing with golfers or just any sport. When he's working with baseball players or whatever, you kind of have to have some general knowledge there to sort of assist that. And I was curious at how much you do in the gym or how much exercise, physiology stuff.
Depends on what the goal is.
Yeah.
I treat in a mindset of, we call it 3 R's. We need to reset things that aren't moving or things that have an issue, whether it's musculoskeletal, nervous, that's where the adjustments come in. And although I'm a chiropractor and that's my favorite tool, I love a good pop and crack. That's not what we're doing. We need to reset the joint. We need to turn it back on and back off. Or off and back on. And then from there, we need to do something with it. And that's, going back to my old job, it's where I was like, there's something missing here where, people aren't getting better as fast as possible and things aren't sticking around. There's that typical misconception with chiropractic and even PT of like, I went a whole bunch of times and I didn't get better. And it's because we're missing those reinforcements, which are, we did an hour worth of care. Now I need you to do this at home and I need you to do this exercise. And then from there, once we get that mobility back or we get that new swing movement, we need to retrain your brain to be able to reproduce it. Because if not, it's just a movement. It's not a pattern that you need to be able to reproduce. And it's fine. There's the classic stepping up to hit the ball and you've got all these swing thoughts. But in reality, in playtime, that is the last thing you need to be thinking about. If anything, you want to be enjoying it or thinking about strategy. So taking the movement, taking what we fixed and doing something with it to the point where your brain can actually use it going forward. So that's where you'll see my exercises. And I always joke, we always feel like we have to do these crazy exercises, but I often bring my patients back down to the floor and we get into primitive movement, because if you can't even control your lower back, how am I supposed to add rotation in or add power in? So it can get crazy, but it can be really simple too. And it really is just meeting the patient where they're at and what they need. Yeah,
that sounds just like Dr. K. It sounds like Dr. Bull that you've probably, have done a little research on as well.
Such an honor.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's like getting on the floor and doing baby crawls and doing like just, like general, like it doesn't have to be, crazy exotic stuff that you see some of the tour players doing on.
I mean,
on Instagram.
We call them sexy exercises. They
Right.
look cool, right? But if you can't even roll over, or you can't even crawl and do a cross crawl pattern, why are you bothering balancing on a Bosu ball with a kettlebell and a band and all these things? I teach some dancers, some strength and conditioning coach on Tuesday nights, and the first thing that I did with them is had them roll over, and they were crying, laughing, but none of them could do it.
Oh my gosh.
You guys are competitive dancers. You have to control your movements and control your spine so you can move around it. And it's just funny to play into the humor of it, but also the seriousness of it. So yeah, movement is very, very important. But if we don't teach our brains how to use the movement, then we're wasting our time, really.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I asked Dr. K.
All boy.
Right. Yeah, and it actually reminds me of, I remember I sent you a text a while ago when Tiger came back right after his ankle being fused. So we'll talk about that here in a second too, because I loved your answer.
Okay.
But just a couple of things, and it kind of piggybacks on what we were just talking about. But the biggest mistakes rotational sports athletes and coaches make in designing a program, what would be your thoughts on that?
Ooh, well, for me, working with youth level athletes, I think my first thing that I look at is equipment, especially with my baseball players. It is too long, too heavy, too soon. And often I'll see my younger kids come in with their dad's old clubs. I'm like, what is happening? So that's one of the biggest things, because if you don't have stability and you don't have strength to support movement and then you put torque into it, you're going to have my injury. I can't sleep at night about that.
Oh boy.
So the biggest thing is, especially younger athletes and even older athletes, because to be completely honest, most adults can't control their core either. But if you can't provide stability around your axis that you're rotating around, it's not a if, but when. So that's kind of my thought on it. I want to see that you can actually maintain a base so you can generate power and you can generate an effective swing.
This episode of the Golf Guru Show is brought to you by our new partners, Astruzi. Listen up, coaches. What I'm about to share is different than what you've come to expect from the guru. Normally, I'm the one asking the perfect questions to tease out the secrets, tips, and lessons learned from the best and brightest in our industry has to offer. This time around, I want to share some perspective. You know you're a business owner, right? You're a solopreneur. You're the founder, CEO, admin, sales, and marketing department. Like you, I often daydream about a world where these no longer consume our valuable time and energy. All of this takes us away from high-value time in the lab developing our players. If some days you feel like Bill Murray from Groundhog Day and your business is slowly sending you into an early grave, well, thankfully, I can say from personal experience, relief is only 5 minutes away. And I know you have 5 minutes. Coaches, if you have a Gmail account, an iPhone or an iPad, have your own LLC, constantly switch between 4 to 5 different services to run your business, charge at least $70 per lesson, or deliver at least 15 hours of lessons per week, then pay close attention because I'm talking directly to you. Astruzi is a business management platform where you finally offload all those wasted hours in admin tasks and get back to doing what we love, coaching your players, nerding out on ball flight laws, and about a million other things you would prefer more. If your business would benefit from 37% net new revenue, Astruzi is for you. If you struggle to build accountability with your players and dream of staggering 71.4% swing analysis viewer rate, Astruzi is for you. If you want a platform that protects and amplifies the decades of experience instead of allowing players to window shop 5 different coaches only to choose the cheapest one or the cheapest option, Astruzi is for you. If you have no idea where to begin, Astruzi is for you. I personally have an account and can vouch for the value that Astruzi delivers. The download link is in the show notes, or head to astruzi.com to download the app. When you create your account, don't forget to add an asterisk to your last name so they know that the guru sent you. Go to astruzi.com today. All right. The pitfalls of over-reliance on bilateral strength and motions.
Oh,
I know it's a big topic, but anything like that comes to mind.
Say it again. Let me make sure I got this down.
So the pitfalls, right? So that what's the problem of over-reliance on bilateral strength and motions? If I'm thinking that means like doing deadlifts, right? I mean, or, a lot of weight training. I mean, I know it's like you said, looks sexy, but how much can that affect, I guess probably going back to like TPI, it's like being able to move, right? I mean, it's like, it's great to look buff, but if we can't move and do our job, and that's what Dr. K talks about a lot, it's like, if we can't actually move a golf club fast, then it doesn't really help us.
Right. Well, the biggest thing is that there is need for it. You know, your glutes are the king of your backswing. You need to develop that power. And I often see people not training it enough. But I also see that they focus too much on that and they're not focusing on unilateral movement, which I think is what the question's kind of getting at. I think the biggest thing is that we're generating power and transitioning it laterally. So if you are focused front to back, which is really important for creating that stable axis, that's important. But if you're not able to then translate that to rotation, then we're going to have a problem. So when you're focusing on that bilateral singular movement, you're focusing in one plane. And we know that golf is 3 planes. So that's really where I think people over rely on one position. I even see it with like runners, right? Like they focus on going forward and going backwards, but then I don't see them training laterally enough. And it's really just to support the ability to resist emotion. Like for me, when I go into my backswing, I am flexible. I am bendy. My problem is not rotation. I guarantee it. I can over rotate. I have the external rotation of an MLB baseball player, but
oh, wow. Yeah.
I have to work on reducing that. So that's where I do a lot of singular training and unilateral training, really not necessarily to increase strength, but really to increase the ability to resist accessory motion we don't want in the swing. So
yes, stability.
I don't know if I answered that well, but
no, I think it's fantastic. Tell me about your game. Where are we at with your golf
I need
right
to take
now?
a lesson. That's where we're at.
You need to come down to Boston.
It's either, I would love to. It's either really good or really bad. So sounds like golf. What's been fun is because I understand movement, I didn't really play growing up. I've been able to develop my movement around what I know I'm capable of. And I have my injury history. So I can kind of program myself. I think people often are surprised at my swing when I tell them I've only been playing a year and a half.
Oh, wow. But, they were that new to the game.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really good at sitting in the cart. I'm a great caddy. I'm great at strategy. I've always sat there and watched the Golf Channel with my dad or actually gone out and watched my husband play. I tell him all the time how lucky he is that I actually enjoy going out with them. But it's fun. I can generate a lot of power when I do it right. And that's always surprising. And I'm getting a lot of practice on my short game.
Good. That's great.
One thing I know is I'm not a good visualizer. So I have to really focus on my putting game and focus on aiming a little bit more. But surprisingly, I'm not too bad. I'm hopeful. I have some good goals.
Yeah. I mean, how is how you train to be a majorette helped you with golf or just any other sports?
Gosh, I think the biggest thing is the mental part of it.
Sure. And
probably the performance part of it and the repetition. We talk a lot about block training and random training when it comes to motor control. For me, in our practice at Alabama, we would choreograph down to the hair flip, the way that our hand was held. The littlest details that made a big difference in our performance. And so we would rep these things over and over and over, but it creates as close as we can get to perfection. And 2, what it allows for is that when we step onto the field at a national championship game, you're not even thinking about the routine. You're just going through the motions. You're going through your processes to step up and make the play and perform and also do all the ambassador part of it. But I think that's the biggest thing is I'm able to tap into the mental side of it and the skill part of it. You can't just pick up a baton and learn it. It's definitely a sport that takes years of dedication and focus and frustration. I can't tell you how many times I'd sit in my driveway learning a new trick, just crying my eyes out because I couldn't get it, or trying to break a baton like guys break clubs. There's a lot of similarities.
No, definitely. Yeah. It's so the question we always get asked as coaches is how do I get that block practice to our playing field, which is the golf course? What were some of the keys? You said it sounded like a ton of block practice, right?
Yes.
It sounded like maybe some slow motion sort of static freezers involved. I'm breaking down majorettes right now.
I love it.
Yeah. And then you said you just sort of how did you sort of turn it off and then allow yourself to perform when the game started?
gosh, I think at that point we've just done it 300, 400, 500 times.
There you go. Like that's we tell golfers that, but they don't get it. It's like, oh, I just can't get it across, to the first tee. I'm like, what the heck, And
in my mind, I'm like, I don't get it when people struggle with the mental side of it because I'm like, you've done it so many times. That's one thing I loved about your conversation with Sean was the way that he puts players into different scenarios so often in his practice, which I'm sure creates chaos. And I would imagine I think he even talked about it, like some of his players get frustrated with it, but that's probably one of the best things you can do because it's creating new patterns. And when you're trying to teach the strategy part of the game, I would imagine it's important to constantly be solving problems so that it's not a new problem when they're presented with it on the actual course during playtime, right?
Yeah, that is very, very well said. And that it's such a hard sell for the average golfer. For us, it's like, I think we may have discussed it in the podcast, but it was just like, sucking and being frustrated is part of the learning process. Like you said, wanting to break your club or your baton is like, you don't get it at the time. You're just like, I just want to get it. But when things start to come together and you're like, oh, wow, now I sort of understand that was an important part of the learning.
And that's the best thing too, is watching people get it. Like when they
100%.
finally get it, it is the most rewarding feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would imagine there's a lot of frustrating things. I'll ask you this, because one of the funniest things that I get, or the hardest thing for me, is to influence people to do their exercises, to do their homework. What do you feel like is the hardest thing to convince a golfer in your world, or at least what's the most common thing for you?
It's probably the same. It's not, I wouldn't say, you get half people that don't practice, but you get other people that do practice, but then they don't really do, like the way they practice the structure is just not really conducive to transferring the skill. It's probably doing, whether you believe in drills or not, I do believe drills can be helpful, the right kind of drill, but getting them to do the drill correctly. There's a lot of little layers to it that we don't get to see, right? We cut them loose and we trust that they're going to do what we told them. We trust that they heard what we said, which is probably like 25%. Right? It really is. It's
if you're lucky.
Right, if you're lucky. So it's like we think, we might give the most amazing golf lesson or have the most amazing session and it didn't come through, which for whatever reason. But yeah, that's the frustrating part, because then they come back and like, oh, I'm getting worse. I'm like, well, what are you doing? Well, this is, and it's like completely the opposite of what you actually told them or showed them to do. So,
right.
With the kids are probably, I don't know, I wouldn't say they're better. There's a decent amount that will do the work. A lot of times I'll have them either take a picture or take a video and like send it to me or bring it to me just to prove that they're actually doing what I told them. But
that is smart.
Yeah, the accountability is difficult, right? So
yeah,
we're trusting them to do a lot of stuff that we really can't keep an eye on.
Yeah. I always play the game of like, I forgot what I told you to do last time. Can you show me your exercise?
I do the same thing too.
It's like,
yeah, whether we forgot or not, I start like a second or third or fourth lesson like that all the time. Like, all right, tell me our plan. Like go through it. And then you start to
that's good. That empowers them. That
right.
Puts it on them. Because I think so often your clients come to you expecting you to fix their problems. And unfortunately, we have the tools, we have the knowledge, but they have to go home and do the work.
We've got to do the work. Yeah.
That's the hard part for us. That keeps us up at night.
No doubt. There's no doubt. So what are you seeing as far as, we'll just focus on golfers at this point, but what are you seeing as far as the most common injuries? And from what you've learned through, I'm sure you're doing a lot of sort of research on golf swing, right? And you're doing it on yourself, but also, you're starting to learn, you're going TPI. I'm sure there's a lot of discussions out there about movement of the golf swing, like how different pieces of the body and the anatomy work. What are you seeing? And like just any general thing that would come to mind. There's a lot I know, but there's usually obviously the back, but it's just give me some ideas on what you're seeing.
Recently, well, first and foremost, the low back is like the most common thing I see.
Yeah.
I'm a chiropractor. That's what people come for me anyways.
Yeah.
I'm like, great. And it's funny because they'll tell me it's lower back and I'll do my full exam and I'll start treating their ankle or their knee or their hip or everything but the low back. And they get really pissed off and confused. I'm like, trust the process. And the wise words of Nick Saban, trust the process. I think recently I've seen a lot of wrist injuries, especially because players are playing off mats right now with the winter, which is a whole new thing to me growing up in South Florida. Even my husband and I were golfing last week and I'm like, why is everything brown? I'm used to green grass year round. This is my first real winter.
You didn't know about that.
Maybe I did. I just didn't realize it was a real thing.
Sure.
But I've seen quite a few wrist injuries recently just from overuse of mats. And I think I see a lot of shoulder injuries, or I've had a couple players who have come in, and there's always good coaching, bad coaching, but their coach is trying to get them more rotation and they're trying to find it in their shoulder, and it's not a shoulder problem, but now it's creating one. I've had that kind of a pattern recently. In that case, I'm just helping them to learn how to use their mid back and use things around it and also get them out of pain. But yeah, I think there's always little patterns. I joke some weeks people come in with ankles and that's all I see all week. And then the next week it's elbow, and the week after it's flipping concussions or something. But yeah, I think it's very seasonal and it depends. I see a lot of ankle conditions a lot too. And that's always an equipment talk. How can we support you where you're at now and what we need to change later, depending on where you're at. But it just kind of depends on what's happening in the environment around us.
Yeah. No, I think us swing coaches can take credit for a lot of injuries over the years, the stuff that we've tried to teach. And so can us
chiropractors.
Let's go through. Let's not move your pelvis and move your upper body, creating torque and the stuff that we know now that's really, really bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing is we know now, right?
Right.
So,
I mean, we didn't have things to measure like we do now, which is, there's really no excuse to not have enough information to try to at least keep players healthy. What were some of the things they talked about at TPI as far as like swing flaws that caused injury?
Well, I mean, they talk a lot about specifically like injury inducing mechanics. A lot of times people come in with a wrist injury or elbow injury. I mean, one of the most common things we hear is golfer's elbow, right? But it's 9 out of 10 times, it's not a extremity issue of the upper body. It's usually a lower body mechanic issue. So it's something that we look at a lot. And I'm always watching people walk in and seeing where they're trying to generate power from. Just when I feel creepy, but they don't realize it.
No, that's the cool thing about what you guys do is like somebody walks into a room, you can probably diagnose 10 things just by how they stand or walk, right?
We can try, but even then, sometimes it's a motor pattern that they're compensating around. But yeah, so focusing a lot on lower body, making sure that you're looking there first, talking a lot about rotational things earlier and unilateral movement. We want to make sure that we're creating a good stable base to even work around. What I loved so much was talking equipment and talking about the other things. Because when we go into those events, like we already know back pain. We know all of the pathologies and the diagnostics. And if we don't, then that's a whole other problem. But, what's fun is we get to nerd out and make sure that we're honing in correctly and looking and approaching a player correctly with our already established knowledge. And then from there, we get to kind of have fun. So one of my favorite hour talks that we had was just shoes alone and how that can apply. And it was awesome. And now I'm a total nerd with that. But
tell me about that. That was my next question. I was going to lead you. Yeah. What are your thoughts on footwear? Cause I'm kind of obsessed of watching how people move and then from the feet up. And so what did you learn about footwear and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first question is I saw creepily from when you were at the PGA show, are you looking at force plates?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm getting ready
to have them.
I'm getting them probably in the next week.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting.
Yeah,
that's on my to-do list in the next year or so.
Yeah, is what I'm getting, which is really, really good. So I'm excited about that too.
They're amazing. Yeah. I'm fascinated by the data. But that was one thing, was talking about have your player come in, throw the different shoe options on, see where they get the best power from as is. From our perspective, looking at medical necessary changes, like, for example, for me, I have absolutely no ankle mobility because I've sprained both of my ankles tumbling at least 6 times each. So the last thing I need to do is find a really stable shoe that locks in my ankle. I don't need my lack of mobility increased, right? So looking at the way that the shoe wraps around the ankle joint, but then looking at the base. For me, I have absolutely no compression in my spine because I'm fused. I have rods and screws. So my low back does this when I jump, where everyone else's does this. So, me and Tiger Woods, we need some good compression. We need a little forgiveness as we're walking.
So what shoes are you playing in currently then?
I'm playing in Adidas. They're like their BOA version. They're pretty good. They have a really, really thick base, and I'm sure that some people wouldn't like them. They're not the cutest, but they help me a lot. I'm able to walk, and I prefer to walk. So they're just the best shoe for my needs. What I love about them is they're so flexible. Yeah, I play the Adidas women's BOA Solar Motion.
Okay.
I'm reluctant to almost say that, though, because what works for me might not work for you.
That's so interesting because I'm always looking, like I've told the story several times on the podcast about some of my members come in to a lesson in my work, indoors on a mat, which is not super stable, obviously, but they'll come in They forgot their golf shoes, so they got their running shoes on, which I think is the absolute worst. Right. And so I'm seeing their feet moving all around. The running, being a runner, I understand heel drop and how everything pushes them towards their toes. And like, it's the worst thing they could do in a golf swing.
Right.
It's funny.
And that shoe is very runner-esque. It's got a very high heel. But for me, with my lack of ankle mobility, when I lift up my heel, like when talking about squats earlier, I have to stand on like a little block to create a little bit of tilt in my heel. It allows me to get into a full functional squat. It allows me to use my ankle for what it's worth. So my golf shoe has a high heel, but again, you might hate that as a coach.
Well, it just depends on how they move, right? And that's what I'm like always obsessed with, kind of watching how people's feet move and then how that affects their balance.
Which is music to my ears.
Well, it's just, and I did a study years ago with FootJoy, had kind of was partnered with Body Track, which I used to be an ambassador for, and they were doing shoe fittings, right? So they would have people hit balls and then they would spit out, what shoe they thought they needed. And I kept seeing sort of patterns, and we got rid of a couple of shoes because I kept screaming at them going, you can't make the shoe anymore. Like they're causing people to shank it. I mean, it's like they're causing people to like fall on their face, right? So it's like that stability is front or back is really, I think, very, very important. I was actually hitting balls today. Yeah, I was actually which I never practiced, but I got to play Saturday in a little club event, and I had 30 minutes and I better hit a few balls. And I teach in running shoes, which is super comfortable, but I would never play golf in them. So I'm hitting balls and I'm like watching the TrackMan. I like keep catching it just a little bit in the heel, which I never do. And I'm like, holy cow, it's because of my shoes. So I hit the last 15 minutes with bare feet and started striping.
You're probably killing it.
Yeah, I started because I can actually feel the ground and so it's just, I don't know. It's always interesting to hear thoughts.
It's a piece I feel that gets left behind quite often. I mean, this is one thing, like if you're making connections and you're getting a sponsor, you don't want to make a deal with the devil. You need to try out the equipment and see how it's going to impact your game, because nobody wants your game to go down at that point, right? Like your sponsor wants to see you succeed. You want to succeed. And the last thing you want it to do is because of a darn shoe. But it makes a huge difference. I mean, even my husband was looking at new golf shoes a few weeks ago, and I had him throw on a couple different pairs he had already, and we just checked ankle mobility, and it drastically changed. I should have videoed it. I'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, but that would be cool to see. Like actually do a screen in the shoes before you buy them.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
I think it's great to have a movement specialist on your team at that point too, because I can, when I've done a full assessment, my players will always ask me like, oh, Doc, I saw this new shoe. What do you think? I'm like, well, for you, sure. Or stay away from it. I'll drop you as a client if you buy that darn shoe.
What would you have them do? Like what screen would you do? Just the overhead deep squat, or what would be some of the things you would look for?
I definitely would look at squat. I would look a lot at just like simple driving the knee forward towards the wall. You can like put your hand in between the foot and the wall and just see if your knee still can reach the wall. That's a simple, easy test. It takes no time. Once I have force plates one day, and if they're at that high level, I will immediately throw them on there, because the data's not going to lie.
Right. Yeah.
And especially working with women, we love to look good, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't always, looking good doesn't always make you play good.
Yeah, I love that. What are your thoughts on breathing?
Oh, that's a huge miss. That's a huge miss. There's a lot of thoughts on breathing. I think often when I see people come in with like exercises they've tried on Instagram, they're like, I've tried this, it's not getting any better. I'm like, are you breathing correctly with it? It can make a huge impact. I think people forget that your ribs articulate with your spine. I mean, where do we want rotation? In the backswing and through your through swing? We want it in your thoracic spine. So if you're not even considering your ribs, which are more than half of the joints there, then you're missing more than half. So if you don't look at the way that your mechanics move with breathing, then it's just a whole thing you're not unlocking. And then too, if you think about like competitive play, when you're walking and you're playing that many holes, and like, gosh, this past weekend where they had to play 2 rounds, if you're not looking at that and not considering how that can impact your game, impact your health on a cellular level, I mean, that's going to change your oxygen intake. That's going to change your pH, and that's going to change your dietitian needs. And it's just a whole spiral. But I think that's very much left behind. And it's such an easy fix. I can't tell you how many times. Actually, I'm working on a research article right now. I was working with a child who had asthma in Georgia, or was diagnosed with asthma. And it happened after he had a concussion. And that's why history is so important to me. But that was one thing that I had noted, and we weren't getting anywhere after like a visit or two. And I think I've alluded to it earlier. Kids respond quickly. And if they don't, then we need to look deeper, and we need to look deeper fast. So I went back to my notes and like, something's missing here. And then I went back and I saw, okay, concussion. So I stopped treating him from a like asthma perspective, which is like very allergy based. And I started treating him for concussion. And I also looked at his breathing mechanics. And the only thing I changed was adding loaded compression of his ribs as he breathes. So turning on those intercostal muscles between the ribs to help him actually articulate and expand his ribs. And this child had been going up.
How did you do that? Like to go a little deeper? That's fascinating.
That was something I learned at TPI, actually. I had learned it like 2 weeks before this child came in. You have the patient lay side lying and you compress their ribs. And you use quite a bit of force, but I don't think people realize how strong these muscles are that help us to breathe. But we compress it, and just kind of like y'all do, like feel versus real. You compress it and you have them breathe into it, but you're resisting the motion. So they're having to work extra hard and turn on the muscles and activate the muscles to actually expand the rib cage. And it's really just resisting them breathing. It's like pushing someone as they're pushing back to you. And that's all we did. And within 2 visits, I got a call from his mom, and she was up at, I think it was at Emory in Atlanta, and the pulmonologist was taking him off all of his medication. He was completely resolved, and that changed that child's life. His personality came back. So there was definitely some concussion things there. You know, his brain wasn't inhibiting things, or he wasn't able to do certain things because of that injury. But also the ribs alone, that's going to change. Like I talked earlier about the cellular components of things, like that's going to change his oxygen levels of his blood and the ability for him to just succeed and thrive. So it just makes me wonder, like, what would have happened if that was continued to be missed? So that's why I'm always asking a million questions. I probably annoy some of my patients, but
yeah,
it's fascinating how rib movement can make such a difference.
Well, I'm sure you're teaching them to breathe as you're adjusting, as you're doing your treatments, right? All this stuff. And
right.
Again, a lot of times I forget to like bring that into a golf lesson, but I do a lot now, especially when I have them doing sort of posing, movements is like now it's like a joke, but it's like, don't forget to breathe. How do you train that? Do you like box breathing, or do you have any like techniques that you go to as far as like teaching that?
I love alligator breathing. That's an easy one to like look up on YouTube and just try at home. It's even great to like meditate with.
I haven't heard that one.
So you lay on the ground prone, so face down, and you put your arms out like an alligator would lay, and you try and breathe and, lift your back off the ground. But if you watch an alligator breathe, their bellies also go out and their ribs go out. So it's trying to breathe like an alligator, and it's fun. It's really hard though. And I think people often breathe so much from their chest or even their shoulders, and it teaches them to use their back and their sides to breathe. That one's a fun one. The other one is just, doing neuromuscular retraining. A lot of times it's just that their muscles aren't firing, or they're using a lot of their accessory muscles instead. And that's where we get a lot of like neck pain or just other issues that come up. But I just do a lot of retraining from a resistance perspective. That's something too that we program in. We talk about breathing and different operations and different processes that they go through. That's where running, cardiovascular training is so important. If a player is going to a higher elevation, their heart rate's going to go up. That's going to increase their anxiety. That's going to increase or decrease their sleep. So preparing for that is something to consider. There's just so many things.
Have you treated runners or like endurance athletes?
I have treated some. One of my athletes right now is about to do a 50K. So she's doing her 30 miler this weekend. So we'll be wishing her good luck.
Nice.
But during COVID, when I was in school, one of my husband's roommates at the time from the Army, he was doing 100 milers all the time. He was a crazy ultra runner. So it was cool for me to practice on him a little bit and help him get through some of his races.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I want to be ultra runner.
I want to know what you're doing. I just saw that you did a half marathon, right?
Yeah. That's kind of making a comeback. Like I did a lot of running for, I was just doing the math. It's been 18 years ago when I did my first marathon.
Wow.
Full marathon. And I did a ton of halves. So that's probably my 10th like overall, but it's been so cool. 5 or 6 years probably since I've done my last one. So moving to the low country in the last 3 years, I've gotten lazy and had some little bit of knee pain, to kind of be fair when I first moved here. So my running was stunted, but then when I started feeling good, I had no excuse.
Yeah.
And I finally just kind of got fed up with putting on a little bit of weight and doing, just not feeling great mentally. And we know how that affects, how important exercise is to just our mental state and just our clarity. Yes. Right. It's just like there's so many levels to it. So I said, heck with it. I'm gonna sign up for a race because I know that's gonna get me going. So that was not long enough to like fully train, but it was 11 weeks.
Wow. That's impressive.
But yeah, I don't be impressed. Well, it just shows that anybody can do it. Like I was never ever thought I'd ever be a runner, and it's a whole nother. If you want to listen to the couple podcasts ago, I'd go into a little bit of the details of my past, but just hard headed and kind of driven, and I've done a lot of miles.
That's impressive. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I know you're trying to. You just started running, or you've been running a little bit. And you ran a 15K or something. That was
I just did a 15K. It was my first race. I have a toxic relationship with running, not from a physical perspective, but a mental perspective. In that, I've always wanted to be a runner. I'm just so impressed. I think I very much admire the discipline, and I admire the mental health component of it. The ability to just disconnect. You never regret a run. Sometimes they're really freaking hard.
Well,
sometimes they're really
last
easy.
One was hard.
Yeah, I would imagine. But that was another thing my surgeon told me is never to run. So in my head, I was like, I can't do this, but I've always wanted to. And and I've done like 3 or 4 miles, and I've done short runs like that. And I'm crazy. I actually love running in the summer. Like, I think because our schedule was always at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon in the heat of summer of Alabama, around 2 to 3 p.m., I get really amped up and I want to go do something crazy and run through a wall. So I go for runs in the heat. But in my head, I'm like 3 miles, 4 miles is nothing. That's not running. So finally, my brother convinced me to do a race with him. I guess, 2 weekends ago. And I was like, fine, I'll go for it. So I signed up for it in December and ran it at the beginning of February. So I think I trained for like 5 or 6 weeks, which I very much surprised myself. I had never ran that far. And it was really fun. I was shocked. And now I'm, of course, wanting to do another. And I'm like, I thought the runner's high only lasted for a few hours, but I don't know how far I'll push it distance-wise.
You got to sign up for another one. Yeah, it's like now, like I'm in runner's depression now, right? So it's only been a few days, but now it's like, okay, I got to sign up for another full.
Oh my gosh.
Point. That's kind of where I'm like, this was just a training, see where I'm at. And I figured like I bonked it mile 11 big time, but it was fine. I finished. It was I wasn't not going to finish, but went out a little fast, when you get a little older, you're like, oh, my former self would have just kept on grinding. And I'm like, let's shut it down and walk a little bit. And then, but it shows me exactly where I'm at. And then I know I've got all these running friends that we have a group chat that's kind of like getting everybody going again. The people that I used to train
getting
with
amped up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So but you're right. I mean, it's so mental. It just reminded me again of like why I was successful in other parts of my life while I was doing all these crazy miles and working. It's almost like a form of meditation, right? It's like it's a way to get away from everything else. Like the people that I trained with, it was great because they weren't golfers per se. They just, it got me away from like my other part of my life. Yeah, my world, right? So it's such a big community. You need to keep going. Yeah, I'm telling you.
I like it a lot. I will say some of the hardest patients to work with are runners.
Oh yeah, we're stubborn. We don't want to take no. Like hey, shut it down. No, I'm gonna keep going. We think we're David Goggins, but we're not.
And I will say I'm the last physician to tell someone not to do what they want to do and what they love, unless I really think it's going to hinder them. But oh my gosh, they're so hard to work with.
Yeah,
but they're also so much fun to work with because they do push themselves and they will do whatever you tell them from a exercise perspective and homework perspective, not necessarily the mileage perspective. But
I understand.
I think I want to do another one. I enjoyed it a little too much. My brother, he came in and he ran way faster than me. He actually runs frequently and he killed it. But he was miserable at the end. And I came across like that last mile, I still had some energy left because I played it smart and put my doctor hat on and I ran really slow in the beginning.
Yeah, I did not do
but
that.
I was able to kind of sprint across the finish line, and it was such a good feeling. But it might not be that like that the next day, Running's so variable.
It's such a I was gonna do a blog post about it because it's so synonymous with golf. Right? Yeah. It's like there's so many different training programs and what works for you. I've gone through this the last 20 years when going through all these things that trying to get better, and every day's different. Every day your body feels different. You have great runs, you have crappy runs. It's like I went out way too fast the other day. I'm looking down my watch at like mile 10. I'm like, I feel great. And I'm like, oh boy, I know it's coming. Because I was training, I was going way faster than it even when I was training, and I hit the wall. But
there's nothing worse than looking at your heart rate being like, oh no,
I'm like, coming. Okay, it's coming. Yeah, I knew it was coming. But yeah, it's all part of it. People used to ask me, why do you do these long races and stuff? It's the journey, right? It is. I've never met too many people that completed a marathon that wasn't successful.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, it's the process. It's like after the race, that's the worst part. Cause then you're like, what do I do now? Right. It's like, you sign up for another one, but it's like that's what they call the running blues or the marathon blues. But there's a thing to it. So keep
that's awesome.
Going.
I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to check in on this.
Please do. Now's the hard part. Like I got to keep going, right? It's like we have these goals. Me and my friends are like, okay, we're going to do another marathon because we all live in different parts of the country now, and we're going to meet up and have a reunion.
Awesome.
And at some point, so hopefully this fall, I'm doing a full one. But
I got
a lot more training to do.
That's okay. There's a lot of lessons in that for you, but it also is very inspiring to your athletes. I think it's always good for them to see us working towards things too in our own personal life.
100%.
So it's always, for me, I always have to have something on my calendar.
That's it. Yeah.
Whether they're looking or not, or they're asking what I'm doing, I need to know deep down that I'm growing somewhere too. So I applaud you for that. And I know that the process is hard, but you've done it before. I know you can do it again.
Yeah. Well, it's all mental at that point, right? So, right. Like you said, it's like being on your feet for 2 or 3 or 4 hours. It like becomes, it is so, I mean, once you're trained up, it's like, can you push forward and keep going mentally? Because it's easy to quit. I mean, that's where it's the inner battle just kind of takes over. But again, it's like I told my boss the other day, he's like, well, how do you feel? I'm like, well, my body's like sort of feeling or remembering what it felt like to be a runner again. It's taken me 5, 6, 7 weeks. They're like, oh, wow, I remember we used to do this all the time. So it's so cool, though. The journey is very interesting. One of the questions that I asked the last couple guests was kind of along those lines is like, where are you? Let me see. Because you're a continuous learner, like we all are, that I have on the podcast, and you're a perfect example. It's like, what part of your life are you a beginner right now?
I'd say my golf, my game itself. Sometimes I think having knowledge is both a good thing, but also a curse. And I am privileged to have grown up around some really great golfers. I mean, my best friend's boyfriend played on the Latin American tour. My husband's pretty good. He had college offers. My grandparents were huge. All we ever talked about was golf. So my expectations are here and my reality is here, and I need to meet somewhere in the middle. And that's not my personality. I want my reality to meet my expectations. So that's somewhere I'm a beginner right now. And 2, business, right? Like I'm learning a lot. I feel like that first year is a lot of trial and error, but it's been so wonderful and beautiful. And like I said earlier, I just don't feel like I go to work every day, which is such a blessing. And there's a lot that's going to be happening this year. There's a lot of growth happening, and I'm really excited for it. And I'm mostly just trying to make sure I'm ready for it. So yeah, I think I always want to be a beginner somewhere. And in some ways, I don't know if I'll ever feel like I know enough. I'll probably still be 90 years old going to seminars.
Keep that mindset, because that's what fuels everything that we're trying to do. And that's what keeps pushing us in success. That's beautiful. My practice looks the same next year that it does right now. I'm going to be very concerned, right? Like I'm not keeping up, and that's on me. That's not on the industry at all. Well, and that's what drew me to you. Like when we met at the summit, I could just tell there was something different, right? It's like this girl's getting after it. Even when I didn't know a lot about you, now I'm like, yes, she's really getting after it. Do you do all your social media? Because your social media is so well done. Like,
Well,
can you
thank
share
you.
just a little? Can you share just a little? I mean, any tricks or tactics that you kind of go through? I know I've heard. I peeked in a few of your former podcasts and heard some of it, but I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. So all of my social media is my own. I think, sitting down with my business coach, that was the hardest thing for me in my first year, is like determining what my process is. And I have established, so shout out to Caitlin, I've established that it's, knowing what I'm really good at, maximizing that, and then resourcing it out. I am not in a marketing major. That was not my focus, but I am, I guess being a performer, I am very creative. And one thing that I missed when I stepped away from my performance career and my sport was that creative side. During chiropractic school, I started a blog actually, and it was really just me sharing like life things as I went through chiropractic school. And as we got married, it was fun to kind of just almost journal that. It's gone now. I don't really focus there just because I don't have the time for it, but that really kind of started it. And as I was a Crimsonette too, I helped develop their Instagram page. So back in the earlier days of Instagram, when it was all photos, I started introducing videos. I always created videos as a child. I always made like hype reels of us four-wheeling in our like land and stuff. Or if we went out and did a performance, I'd make some crazy hype reel for it. So I already had that background and that passion for it and that fun part of it. And I really wanted to get that back when I did step into my own business. It just takes a lot of time, and it's okay if you're not good at it, right? Like there's a reason there are marketing agencies out there. I just knew that's one thing I could do. So I focused a lot there. Tips for it: consistency. Consistency is key. I think that's the biggest thing that I see across different social media, is just a lack of branding as a whole. If I come to your page and I don't see consistency or in font, or consistency in content, or consistency in personality, and your overall how you present yourself, then I don't know what you're offering, especially in a service industry. So my biggest thing was making sure that I was always entertaining. I love the way that Red Bull markets. They're never talking about the actual drink. They're talking about people's lifestyle and how that applies. And that's how I want people to see my content. I'm always terrified of the trolls, because chiropractic is a very interesting field sometimes if people don't understand it. So I don't really want to go viral necessarily. I really just want to speak to the clients and the people that are following me and be consistent for them, so that they want to continue to stick around and see what's going on. So yeah, I think I just had a natural platform because of Crimsonettes. And after that, I just kind of ran with it and had fun with it. And that's really where I get to be creative now, is create content. And it's fun, and it's also exhausting. I've been kind of slow with it lately because I just haven't wanted to do it, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, it's hard.
And it's also hard in my field too, with HIPAA and everything. It's awkward. Like,
say,
hey, can I film this appointment?
I was going to say, do you have somebody else filming because I know you have a few like little clips of your sessions or whatever, or do you just like set a camera up and to keep it running?
I have a little guy on Amazon. I think he's $40, and he follows me when I move around the room. So I just stick my phone on it, and it just kind of creates movement, which our eyes like movement. We don't like to sit and stare at like pictures, right? We used to, and we love an art gallery, but now all of our content is quickly moving and our brains want to constantly get something new. So I try to always make my videos have some movement. So I don't, it's kind of awkward to have someone watching. It's awkward to have someone filming. So I just put that up, and if they're comfortable with me and they give me consent, then I'll use that content however I can. I'd love to get to the point where I can hire someone to come in and get great content, but that'll happen eventually.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's one of my goals this year. I think I talked about it in my pod with Bilotti. It was just, I got to get back in front of the camera. I did it for years and on YouTube, had my own show and the whole deal.
Awesome.
Tips, but I want to kind of like the podcast. I want to give back more to the coaches and sort of give them a little more insight of like what I do on a day-to-day basis. That I just hadn't done that. Maybe once I get in a little better shape, maybe that'll.
Oh my gosh. You're fine. You're healthy. You look great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm getting a little more itch to do that, but that's so cool. And yeah, keep up the great work. I mean, I think it obviously it helps your business, but I mean, it just gives you a nice brand awareness of like what you're doing. And I think one of your things that you said on the website was like changing that perception of what chiropractic care is, right?
Absolutely is. Yeah.
And then, I mean, that's what you're trying to do. And I love the fact that it's like, I like to call it more like human performance, right? It's like,
yes.
or human movement rather than like, you're the old, oh, they're just going to crack your back, right? It's like,
yeah.
What are some of the other things that you do as far as, do you like dry needling, or like what kind of techniques do you like specialize in?
Yeah. So I recently got certified in dry needling. So I have implemented that, and that's very fascinating. I don't use it all the time, but when I need it, I see such great results with it. I do a lot of like soft tissue scraping. I do ART, which is called active release technique. And essentially that's pinning down the insertion and the origins of the muscles and actually getting that true stretch, that true lengthening. That is powerful. It sucks as a patient. And honestly, my thumbs hate it too. I had to ice my thumb earlier today because I was working on shoulders a lot. But it's hard, but it's very effective. So I do a lot of soft tissue work and then implementing exercise, but being productive with the exercise. And you kind of alluded to that earlier too. Like, drills are great, but is it the appropriate drill for what we're trying to do?
Right.
I look at things the same way. Exercises are great, but if we're training you in flexion, but you have an extension problem, I'm wasting my time, I'm wasting your money, and you're not getting better. And that's not good for business. So knowing why you're prescribing something or why you're using a tool is the biggest thing. I have athletes that I don't, or patients that I don't adjust, and that's very rare.
Right.
I'm a big fan of getting mobility, and manipulation is a great way to get it done. But there are times where it's not indicated, and I'm not going to do it if it's not needed. That's just negligent. So that's hard for people to get like through their brain. Sometimes patients come in wanting to get popped and cracked, or kind of going back to earlier, like they have low back pain, but I'm working on their shoulder and their thoracic spine, and I haven't even touched their low back. Like it's hard, but that's where patient education comes into play.
Yeah, I think that's so cool though. That's the fascinating part. When you start working on somebody's big toe and it like helps their neck.
Yeah, regional independence is weird.
It's so weird. That is awesome. So a couple quick hitters before I let you go.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. What are some books or maybe books that have influenced your career or your life? It could be any, it doesn't have to be within your field, but just I kind of like the ones that are like out of that realm. Have you most gifted or has influenced or had a big effect on your life? Anything you can recommend?
I recently just finished a book called Checklist Manifesto that was recommended at the last seminar I went to. And it was really, really cool, especially as someone who likes processes. Sometimes I also get frustrated because I like the creative side of things. And sometimes the processes can be a little bit, we should always question them. And I think that's very important, but it's also, to also have some safety. So having those things that we always go through, I think the book really talks about, I think it was like a surgeon in the operating room and how having certain checklists ended up saving lives and how it's important to find those in our life and implement them. So that was really interesting. I love, what's the book about 1% better every day? I can't even remember. I think it's Atomic Habits. I really like that one.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah. I've read that one.
I love that book. There's so many. From a nerdy perspective, I read a textbook this past year called Motor Control with a Behavioral Emphasis. And that rocked my world. That completely changed how I train and teach people. You kind of talked about it earlier with, showing your athlete something you want them to do and helping them to make sure that they know how to do it correctly. Mm-hmm. That's been something that's been really changed for me in reading that book. I always help someone go through an exercise or a movement that we're trying to achieve, but I always ask them different questions, or we do random training instead of block training so that I know and I can make those little check boxes of they've learned this exercise, they can reproduce it without me, and now I can let them go home. So I'll ask, like, where are you feeling your body work right now, so that they can have little checkpoints for themselves to make sure they're doing it right. And I'll tell them, if you don't feel it, don't bother. You're wasting time. Which is hard for kids because you can be like, do you feel this muscle? Or do you feel where the club is right now? And it's like, do you really? Where do you feel it? So that they can go and find something every time to reproduce it. So if you want to nerd out and read a textbook, that was great. I really should read more.
Well, it's kind of gone to the wayside, right? I mean, I know I'm older than you clearly, but I've read hundreds and hundreds of books. Now it's like I've read probably 20 audiobooks in the last probably year and a half, right? Because it's like so much more convenient. You're in the car or you're just, hanging out or you're working out, or now on my runs, I can actually, listen to on the AirPods. But
I'm a
now
podcast junkie.
Right. And it's podcast. Exactly. So like me coming up, I was listening to CDs and when those used to be popular, and now they're all on iTunes, a lot of the stuff that I used to listen to, but now it's podcast. Yeah. So everybody hopefully listens to my podcast when they're working out or running. All right, cool. So what is an unusual habit or absurd thing you love?
Oh,
Something
gosh.
that nobody would know about.
I mean, everyone knows that I'm obsessed with coffee. One thing, gosh, absurd thing. I'm quite absurd. That's a good question. I'm going to start using that one on people. Wow. I live for sunlight. So I will hit my snooze button a lot. I'm very guilty of that. But one thing that I'm always drawn to light when I get up in the morning, I have to like go outside and ground a little bit, or I have to open my windows. My other weird things, I'm trying to think of like funny things.
Yeah, that's not weird. That's Andrew Huberman. If you listen to Dr. Huberman, big
Obsessed
fan of
with
him. Yeah, there you go. So he talks about that all the time. Give me something a little bit crazy.
I will always try something before I give it to a patient, which is hilarious because some sports are not made for me. So that's funny. I've almost hurt myself quite a few times doing that.
Give me an example. Come on.
Oh my gosh. So I'm not a football player, clearly. I'm tall, but I'm not a burly girl. But talking about forward motion, like that's a sport you need to be very grounded in bilateral motion. So I tried to like run into a hanging punching bag, and there in my mind, I was going to move it, and I did not move it. It moved.
You try to tackle it?
Yes. So that's something. Gosh, that's a good question though. I mean, now I'm going to reflect on it, and I'll get back to you on it.
Yeah, you can text me later. No problem. All right. So when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, you feel stressed out, what are some of your go-tos? What do you do? What questions do you ask yourself?
A lot of mindset stuff. For me, I think because I was in a performance-based thing where I had to appear a certain way, I'll fall back to that very quickly. If I need to have a really good day at work, I have a certain pair of leggings I put on. I put my hair in a ponytail. I make sure I do my makeup. I want to look presentable as if I was about to go perform on the field. And I'll get a cup of coffee. I'll go to Starbucks and get it. I'll have someone make it for me. I'll pay the $6 because it's just, those are little things that I know if I do that, I'm bound to have a good day. And if I don't, then at least I tried. Like there are things that I can physically check off the list and know that I've tried and done. So that's some things that I do. I always fall back on sleep. I learned that during chiropractic school because we don't get a lot of it. And the program I went to was accelerated. So rather than it being a 4-year program, it was 3.25. So I really didn't get much sleep. And finally, my roommate was sick of me staying up all night. And she was like, Savannah, you've got to go to bed at 10. And ever since she did that, I have fallen in love with my sleep. So if I can get an hour back.
Do you have something to monitor that? Do you use like Whoop or?
I just got a Garmin. I'm obsessed with it.
It tracks your sleep?
Yes, it does. Which has been almost frustrating. I'm like to the point of about being like actually wanting to go sober because it really does affect my sleep.
Oh yeah. Trust me. Yeah, I'm the same way.
I only drink like 2 nights a month and I'm still pissed off when I do. But yeah, that's something that I've really dove deep into, but it really just makes such a difference. And from a like repair recovery thing, if we're not seeing results with people, that's something I always fall back on. Or if I know an athlete's hurt, that's the first thing I recommend, like get a good night's sleep. It's just so important for your recovery process, for your brain to take a break and just kind of check out that and just be around people. I've learned to find certain people in my life that are really good for certain things. Like, especially us women, we are very conversational. We want to talk to people, and that's how we deal with stress a lot. I'm sure that could be a whole twist on things, but I know who to go to when I'm sad, who to go to when I need to be pumped up, and who I go to when I just need to talk about things that are completely irrelevant to my life, kind of like your runner friends. And knowing that has been really helpful. And also taking that on myself. And when people come to me for certain things in my friendships, on my end, what am I providing them? So that's been something that I've really implemented the past few years. It's really played a huge role into the relationships into my life. That's a big thing, is just like knowing your support system and what they're there for and what they're good at and what they're not. Because I think we ask too much of people sometimes and too much of ourselves too in those situations.
That is incredible self-awareness, I got to tell you. It really is. That's awesome advice. All right, last one, and then I'm going to let you go. So if you had to get a message to the world, to billions of people, and The original question was you could put it on a billboard, metaphorically speaking, but now I've changed it to like it's a group text.
Yeah,
in our days, and it's a group text to the world. What would your message be and why?
Gosh, I think that'll be ever changing for me. Not being able to communicate with my sister really made me see the world in a different light. One thing that as a family we always said was like, to the world you might be one, but to one you are the world. Knowing that in your heart and knowing you're worth it is really important to me. I push people. I'm excuse my French, but I'm an asshole sometimes. Like, I'm going to push you because I think you're worth it. But making sure that people know that, I want to be the caretaker and the healthcare provider that people know at the end of the day that I really do care. When my sister passed, I will never forget that our pediatrician drove up that night from Palm Beach up to where we live, just about 30 minutes away, and was there with my family. And I have been at home births. I have been at really sad moments with some of my patients, and I'm only 2.5 years into practice. So that's something that's really important to me. But I think just helping people to know that they're worth it and whatever that capacity is. And then 2, on the lighter side of things, I think the greatest joy in life for me is watching people do what they're good at. Whether it is golf or if it's writing or if it's doing a podcast or creating social media content, I don't care. Even if it's just a sweet old man just talking to people and that's what he's good at. Like, I want to watch people do what they're really, really, really good at, because you can just see their eyes light up and their brains just, it's such a gift. So telling people to find what you're good at and then go do that, as basic as it is. It doesn't sound very scientific, but whatever brings you joy and what you're really, really good at, go do that.
That's an amazing message.
Well, thank you. Awesome. I appreciate it.
I think I really enjoyed spending time with you. Hopefully we can continue a relationship, and at some point working together with some players would be super cool.
I'd love to.
But thank you so much for your time, and let the listeners know how they can find you, how they can follow you on your socials, and then how they can find you where your establishment is.
Yeah. So my personal page is like more of my just personality. That's Savannah Z. Gardner. That's definitely not my work page. You'll see some golf stuff on there sometimes, but that's more of my life. My work page is Family and Co. Chiro. I will say that we might be rebranding in the next few months, so it might change in a little bit, but Family and Co. Chiro. And then, I think that's it. Where else can they find me? Oh, I'm located in Pinehurst. So Pinehurst, Southern Pines, North Carolina. So if you're up here on a golf trip or anything, or you just want to connect and get coffee and chat, I'm always up for that. I love meeting people and collaborating and just learning about others. So I think that's what's so cool about your podcast. I've just learned so much in the few episodes I've listened to. We all see things so differently, but so similarly at the same time. And I think the way that you have structured your podcast and the guests that you've brought on are just really, really cool. And it helps create community too. So I'm so grateful to have been here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely honored. Just comparing me to some of those positions, I could cry. But I'm excited to see where I go, and I'm excited to see where you go, and definitely keep in touch. I'm bummed I didn't get to run into you at the PGA show. My traveling was a hot mess.
Mine was too. So, but our paths will cross again, I promise. But anything I can do to help, feel free to reach out. And just keep doing the work you're doing, because you're inspiring, and I think you're going to do big things. And you're already doing big things, but sky's the limit for you, girl.
Well, thank you so much. And if there's ever anything that you think might even pique my interest, send it my way.
Absolutely. We'll do that. I appreciate you.
Back at you. Thank you so much.
What's up, everybody? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you jump off. First, thank you to Dr. Savannah for coming on the show and sharing her incredible insight on human movement, performance, and life that I know will help all of us become better coaches and better human beings. That was just a really cool conversation. Appreciate her time. Make sure you follow Savannah on the gram at Savannah Z. Gardner. That's her personal IG, or Family and Co. Chiro, which is her business IG. Both of those are worth a follow. And check out her website at familyandcochiro.com to see everything that she's doing in Pinehurst, where you can find her at Southern Pines. Thank you again to my sponsor, Estruzi. Please go download the app and check it out. Make sure you add that asterisk after the name so that we know that you heard it on the show and you heard it from the Golf Guru Show. Appreciate that. You can also follow and reach me on Twitter, X, or Instagram at Golf Guru TV. Golf Guru TV. I appreciate the follow. And if you have a question or comment, you can email the show at golfgurushow@gmail.com or hit me up on the DM. This episode was produced by Joel North. Thank you, Joel, for your continued excellent work on this episode and future episodes of the Golf Guru Show. Music was brought to you by Kevin MacLeod and Zach Mullet, aka Cutta Beats. Leave me an iTunes review or a rating. That would be awesome. 5-star review would be fantastic. And as I always leave you with the Jim Rohn quote, study, practice, teach, and make sure you pass it on. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.